Great. Thanks again for being here today, everyone. My name is Rihanna Putnam. I'm the Community Engagement Specialist for the Citizen Science Association. I have just a few slides about the CSA and a couple housekeeping notes, and then I'll turn it over to Caroline, Heather, and Jill to lead our discussion today. So the CSA is a member-driven organization that connects people from a wide range of experiences around a shared purpose of advancing knowledge through research and monitoring done by, for, and with members of the public. Our efforts are concentrated into a biennial conference. Our next one is going to be in May of 2021. We have a peer-reviewed journal and member services such as our working groups, online networking, and webinars like these. Our membership represents the multidisciplinary and multidimensional nature of the field and includes project leaders, educators, librarians, researchers, and more. We have 9 working groups at CSA that explore cross-cutting issues like evaluation, ethics, data, and more. Our working groups are one of the key ways that we work to advance the goals of the CSA through the sharing of resources, best practices, and relevant information, both among group members and also to the broader citizen science community. We're excited to be reviving the education working group and expect that many of you may find connection and support there. Our webinars are often led by our working groups, but occasionally, such as today, we invite others from the community or other community experts to lead timely discussions. With all of our webinars, views shared here are those of the presenters and don't necessarily represent those of CSA. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded to a YouTube channel. You can find an archive of all of our past webinars on our website. There you'll also find registration links for upcoming webinars, such as the last webinar in our happy hour in our series on using citizen science in higher ed. This last one will be on using citizen science in non-STEM courses, and that one is next Friday. There are a few ways that you can help support this free webinar series from the CSA. One is by becoming a member. Membership dues are an important contribution to the work that we do to create connections across the field and support our working groups and the quality webinars that they help coordinate. If you're not already a member, now is a great time to join. We also have a donation page that I'll link to in the chat. If you find value in this learning opportunity and have the means, you can help cover the hard costs to keep webinars like these free for those who can't pay. We are expecting a big crowd today, and so I do encourage you to double check that your video and audio are off. There should be time at the end of the presentations for some questions, and we'll invite folks to chime in then. For now, if you want to head over to the chat and introduce yourself, and tell us where you're calling from. We'll have a few poll questions in a little bit to get to know you all better. And with that, I'll turn it over to Caroline Nickerson, who's a program manager at SciStarter. We also have Jill Nugent, Associate Dean for Online STEM at Southern New Hampshire University, and Heather Vance-Chalcraft, Associate Professor at Eastern North Carolina University. Thanks, everyone, and big thanks to our presenters for putting together this panel.
Yay, thank you so much, Rihanna, and to the Citizen Science Association for hosting us today. And thank you to everybody in the audience for being here. Before I share my screen, I'm just quickly putting a Google Doc in the chat. That belongs to you all. It's your place to put comments, questions, ideas, thoughts, and we hope you use that. So let's get our assessment presentation going. There we go. We hope you use that as we go to make sure that we address all your points during this webinar, because we're allowing ample time for discussion at the end. So really quickly, I'm Caroline. I'm with the SciStarter team, and I myself am a citizen scientist, and I'm really passionate about it. And I'm here to help speak about some free tools you can use to aid your assessment as you assess citizen science in higher education. Then I'll let Jill introduce herself.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Hi, everyone. Happy World Environment Day to all. My name is Jill Nugent. I live in North Texas, north of Dallas, and I serve as Associate Dean of Science at Southern New Hampshire University for the online courses and programs, teach 3 to 4 science classes a year as well, and serve on the SciStarter team and write citizen science columns for NSTA, and thrilled that you're all here to talk about this topic. So I'll pass it to Heather.
Hi, welcome. I'm Heather Vance-Chalcraft, and I'm at East Carolina University, and I do biology education research and have a background in ecology. So we're very excited to join you today.
All right. So the question on everyone's mind, what is assessment and why do we assess? And Jill and Heather are definitely the experts in this realm because they are assessing students in the classroom and thinking very deeply about this in their professional careers. But I wanted to show this slide and get this question at the forefront of all your minds, because assessment is really the time for us to ask, are students learning what we think they're learning? You know, are we teaching what we think we're teaching? Are we accomplishing our goals? What are our goals? So assessment is a really key part of that. And it relates to citizen science because citizen science can be a tool for teaching and a tool for discovery and for all sorts of different things in the classroom and in higher ed. So we have some poll questions. Rihanna, I'll let you kick those off for us. Yeah, we just want to know, you know, what's your discipline? Have you used citizen science in your classes? Any answer is fine. We hope we have people from all walks of life, all levels of experience. I think everyone will find something to learn from in this webinar. Oh, we got quite a few nevers so far. Very interesting. Well, you're in the right place to learn how. We got a few sometimes. That's awesome too. Citizen science is very flexible. And a lot of life sciences folks in the room, 69%. Good stuff. I think we have a few more poll questions. So now we're digging a little bit deeper with this next one, you know, how much have you used it? You know, for those of you who answered sometimes, have you just used it briefly? Are you fairly new? For those of you who are pros, do you use it regularly? And when you have used it, have you assigned assessments, formal or informal, related to its use? And if so, we'd love if you could list the general category of assessment. So reflection, content quiz, lab report, published assessment, etc. in the chat box. So please vote and then make your thoughts known in the chat or in our Google Doc. All right, we got some fairly new people. Awesome, awesome. Some people who used it once. And the majority of people have not assigned any assessment previously. So that's very interesting. So good to know. Let's go to our next slide. So why use citizen science?
Great, that's me. Oh, let me turn on my video here for you. So there's many different reasons why you might want to use citizen science in your classes. And so we wanted to ask you, why do you want to use citizen science in your classes? So we'll start with that poll question. Rihanna, do we have that? Oh, there we go.
Thank you to all of you for filling out these polls for us today. I think that these are some of my favorite parts of these webinars because we get to hear from you. I guess we're assessing ourselves in a sense. You know, we're trying to get the why and how here. Maybe in our final webinar of this series, we can do another poll about how we did or your perception of it. And this one's a little bit of a longer question, so don't be afraid to take your time, read the answers, and vote.
Yeah, and my apologies to folks who can't select more than one. I think I clicked the wrong box when I was setting up the poll. And so maybe pick the one that best fits, knowing that folks have multiple reasons.
Yes, pick your favorite. All right, looks like the majority of folks have voted. We'll give you one more chance. All right, there we go. So it looks like the majority, even though there's a pretty even spread across all these different reasons, folks want to students to participate in citizen science to expose those students to authentic scientific research, as well as to show students the relevance of science to the real world. That's really interesting.
Great. Well, as you've seen, there's lots of different reasons why you might want to use citizen science in your classes. And you can translate some of those, or you can articulate some of those reasons for using citizen science as kind of learning objectives. What are your objectives that you're trying to accomplish with your students? And then, you know, those learning objectives could include things like wanting to increase the motivation of your students. Maybe you work with non-science majors and you want to get them more interested in science, so you want them to become motivated. Maybe it's about engagement, you know, really engaging them in the course material in some deeper way. Maybe you want to help them build some confidence and some self-efficacy in their ability to do science, to see themselves as able to do science. Maybe you want that to build their identity so they identify stronger as a scientist, so they're more likely to persist in a science field. Maybe you want to increase their science literacy. Maybe you want to expose them to authentic research, or to help them learn specific content knowledge. There's all those reasons and many more, and you probably have more than one motivation for using this if you are considering using it. So what I would encourage is that you think about what your primary reasons are for wanting to use citizen science in your class, and then try to align your assessment plans with those primary goals or objectives. So, for example, some of these objectives might best be met by something like having students write reflections. Other ones might be better met by doing a content quiz before and after they experience citizen science, for example. You might want to survey your students about their attitudes or about their identities, and there's published instruments out there you can use, or you can create your own questions. So there's lots of different ways to do assessment. And assessment can be informal or formal. So you can do formative assessment, which is assessment kind of as you're in the process of doing the exercise. And so maybe you just want to give the students feedback for themselves about how they feel about something, or provide you with feedback while there's still time to make adjustments and make some changes as needed. Maybe though it's at the end of a citizen science unit and you want to come up with some summary conclusions about what they gained from the experience. And so that's more summative sort of assessment. And all of these things are useful, and they all have great benefits to students to help them self-reflect and understand what they know and what they don't know, as well as being really beneficial to you to help you shape your learning moving forward. All right, so I think how extensive you want to go with your assessment also depends in part on your motivation for doing the assessment. It is certainly completely valid to collect assessment data for your own personal course improvement. And in that case, you know, there's a variety of methods you might want to use. You might, however, be collecting data for some sort of departmental or program assessment, in which case there might be different constraints that you have and you might need to go a little bit more formal. Or you might even be trying to collect data hoping to publish it. And so all of these are potential reasons why you might assess, and it would influence your decisions of what sort of assessment exercises you might have your students do. And any of those reasons is worthwhile, but you want to think about those things as you begin the process of thinking about assessing. All right, I'll hand it off to Jill.
Great, thanks Heather. Yeah, awesome connections to this topic and great examples. Yeah, so as we think about assessing student participation in citizen science, if we use iNaturalist as an example, as a citizen science example, you know, evidence of participation may be observable in the platform itself, whether it's on iNaturalist or on the SciStarter platform, which a lot of folks use as well. Where you'd be able to assess your students' participation in a number of custom ways that works best for you, such as number of observations, contributions of identification help to others on a project, and so much more. Next slide. Yeah, so again, this is a view of some species in iNaturalist. So citizen science engagement and participation, it can also be assessed as an artifact that the student produces, such as this example after the City Nature Challenge, where students are working on creating species guides based on iNaturalist biodiversity observations. What I found is that artifacts like these also help to build students' e-portfolios in today's 21st century world. Additionally, authentic assessment is really relevant for citizen science engagement and participation. So examples of authentic assessments might include tasks, projects, artifacts that mirror what would be seen in real life in our disciplines. So like for environmental science, students might produce scaffolded deliverables that culminate in an environmental impact assessment. So authentic assessments measure student learning in a way that is consistent with how our disciplines function outside of the academic learning environment. They work really well with PBL, project-based learning, and they really build our learners' professional portfolios. In fact, one came my way this week. I have to share, I was so excited. I had an environmental science student who just graduated interviewing. He has an interview scheduled with a national lab, and he said he learned that his application stood out to them because he included a portion of an authentic assessment from an environmental science course in his application materials. And then other previous students have gotten their foot in the door in this competitive field, right? With state wildlife departments and environmental consulting groups. Because of their iNaturalist citizen science engagement, it can serve as their digital portfolio of their knowledge and skills, especially related to species ID. And there's so many ways that we can assess that, whatever works best for your environment. Next slide. Yeah, so when we talk about instruments for assessment, I think we can start looking close to home. In terms of deliverables and assessment instruments, lab reports are a great place to look. Citizen science is doing science, and so a lot of lab reports, rubrics, assessment tools can actually be repurposed for your citizen science, for your students' participation in citizen science. I've also looked to poster sessions as great fits to assess students participating in citizen science experiences, science notebooks, students writing a species brief, having students create a presentation tailored to a specific audience, such as a local community group and more. There's so many ways we can really be creative, especially in authentic assessment, to assess our learners and their engagement and experiences in citizen science projects. Good news though, so look close to home, because in your departments, you've probably got a treasure trove of tools to use or repurpose. But good news also is that there's existing instruments out there as well. And so one, you guys have, I bet half of you guys or probably more have this on your bookmarks. I had to mention the DEVISE collection. So the acronym is Developing, Validating, and Implementing Situated Evaluation Instruments. So the DEVISE project was about a decade ago, NSF-funded, and it was designed for program evaluation in citizen science, but there's tools developed around sets of constructs, interest, self-efficacy, et cetera, that measure outcomes in those areas. And each instrument comes along with instructions for use and scoring. And so I've found great use with those validated instruments in my work. You know, when I have students participate in citizen science, I've gone to those tools. And in my action research, I haven't published, but in the action research, I've seen really exciting outcomes that I kind of use to continuous improvement in my teaching practice. Another one, I'll grab the link for everybody. Just another existing resource tool that's out there. It's another acronym. There's acronyms for every tool. It's SENSOR, so Science Education for New Civic Engagements and Responsibilities, and it's their SALG tool, which is student assessment of their learning gains. That's a great instrument where students report on their things related to their skills and interests, civic engagement. It's a 10-question tool. 6 are on course design and practices, 4 on course learning objectives. So just another tool that's out there, and that's just one. SENSOR has some other things that have been crowdsourced and shared among folks in the field, practitioners, which is great. There is a large database of existing tools that when I got a new laptop for work, I panicked because it was gone from my bookmarks and I had trouble finding it again, but it's the pairweb.org. It's a comprehensive database of validated tools and assessment instruments. Many are relevant to citizen science participation in the context of a learning environment. And in fact, even, I think I have the bookmark, I'll pop it in here. This database also lists our citizen science devise instruments. So I'll just pop that in the chat because it's relevant to our topic and our interest. But that is a great database. So the first one that comes up on that database page is Draw a Scientist. So at first glance, you might think, okay, well, I'm in higher ed, but in the higher ed ecosystem, we often work with, summer programs, K-12 outreach, pre-service teacher courses in science. So even like the Draw a Science instrument, I've actually used that pre and post citizen science engagement, and it really leads to some interesting discussion, observations, outcomes. So there's a lot on that website. It's just really fun to search and investigate some things that are out there. Next slide. Yeah, so we thought we would share some examples. So the context for this is a spring semester citizen science course at my institution. It includes citizen science, career connections, and it culminates in the spring with student participation in the City Nature Challenge, so a global bio-blitz. So that's kind of the overview for the course, and it's designed with experiential learning in mind. So students are out there, they're away from their computer screens, they're immersing in citizen science all throughout the term, they're doing some career connections, and then of course, toward the end of April, they're doing City Nature Challenge. So basically the assessments in that course, we have weekly timesheets. So every single week, the students have got to turn in a timesheet with the date, title of their activity, the type of their activity, the source of the activity, and to get full points, it's assessed via a rubric. They have to document 10 hours spent in the field every week. If they document 7, that rubric criteria, they're not going to get a full score for that. And we see that a lot. Some of them just do 8 or something like that. It's hard to get to 10 some weeks, but it's every week. And then when we're assessing this, as the instructor, the rubric for the timesheet, we're not just scoring them. We're not just saying, you got a 90 out of 100. We're going through each criteria on the rubric and we're giving them feedback. So like some of them need a little bit of coaching, like to get their hours up. Some of them get a little bit lost, trying to find the right project. Because I'm like, by week 3, you need to stop researching projects, get out there, pick one and get out there and do it. So anyway, they're getting that formative feedback, even on their timesheets, which, in some regards, you may just want it as a check. Yep, they submitted it all good. But we found in our environment, giving the feedback on all of the items is helpful to the students. Next slide. So that's one part. In the same course, we also have weekly discussion boards. And so again, we assess that via a rubric. And so each week in the course, there's going to be a prompt that the instructor would write. And then it encourages the students to dive into the discussion board and share their thoughts, experiences, connections. They love posting pictures and links, which we love as well. So for this, there's also a rubric that the instructor would use to score and also leave feedback for every rubric element. Like even, for example, timeliness, like if they're supposed to submit it by Thursday of every week, their initial post, so there is a deduction if it's submitted Friday, things like that. We also have the option to record audio feedback for any of our rubrics. Rubric elements, so that's helpful. One thing that I have found extremely helpful is that in our courses, every time a rubric clicks to assess learners in any of the rubrics, whether it's an assignment, a project, a discussion board, they're clicking a rubric. What that does in the learning management system is that it generates student learning data on student learning outcome achievement. That has been so helpful in terms of program evaluation, program review, ongoing program and course improvement. Because if you have, say in a term, I have 500 instructors teaching, they're all generating data that's getting fed into a system, a database that we can kind of use to continually check things and improve. Because as you know, as we kind of talked about, assessment drives instruction, it drives learning, it informs students of their progress, it informs our teaching and our instructional practice. So the data When student learning outcomes aren't being met, when we do those postmortems after the semester, we can highlight areas where there may be gaps in instruction, resources, or any aspect of the experience. Oh, sure, definitely. Thanks, Andrea. Yep. Next slide. Yes, and this is a little hard to see, but for the journals and reflections, for this citizen science experience, we modeled it in the spirit of experiential learning. And so we're really big on students submitting reflection on the experience. So really experiential learning in a nutshell, which is different for them at first. They're so used to submitting content reports. But once they get into this, they absolutely love it. And as you'll see, this would be like a formative. So during the, not summative, because the highest level that they can achieve is proficient. So it's either not evident, needs improvement, proficient. So for the higher stakes summative assessments, like the final project, we would have a 4-level rubric that would go up to exemplary. And I always have to remind them, because sometimes they've been going along week by week, they're doing great, getting proficient, they read their feedback. And then before that final is due, I always remind them, read the instructions of the rubric, because it is a 4-level rubric. And if you want to get towards exemplary, you may have to add some of the things to your earlier milestones. But that formative assessment feedback throughout the term and semester, it really gives learners a clear picture on their progress, on their learning goals, how they might improve. And the feedback is there to help encourage them to improve. So I like to think of it as taking the pulse of the student learning, whether, how it's going, whether, as for me, like what else I can help add to the course, because something that I might think makes sense, it's not connecting to them at all. Oh, great question. So I love Canvas. We're in Brightspace, so D2L Brightspace. Yeah, great question. Although Canvas right now is like the top one that I've seen, the top LMS that most schools are using. My dad just retired from a professor, and his school was in Canvas. And then before, all of you guys probably remembered Blackboard used to be the big one. So our institution, after people were leaving Blackboard, we went to D2L Brightspace. Great question. There's so many out there, which is exciting. So yeah, and then also to speak to different models, a lot of schools now have the competency-based model where you do a specific task. There's a whole new exciting area of micro-credentials, skills, competency-based learning where students might come, still in Blackboard. Hey, I loved Blackboard. Yep, still it did a good job. So competency-based, your students may come in, take a diagnostic tool. So we talked about kind of formative and summative, but there's also diagnostic assessment. So it may be in a model where students are coming in, taking a pre-assessment diagnostic. That's really interesting to see, because they all come into the course with all sorts of knowledge, understanding, background. And often what we see in science, especially my colleagues in physical science, they always talk about the moon phases, where students bring misconceptions of science content and concepts to the course. And so those can be great to pre-diagnose where they're coming in. Some of the schools that do competency-based learning, students do a pre-assessment, the students get custom support and resources. And then when the student feels ready to demonstrate the skills competency, they take the summative formal assessment. So gosh, lots of options with all of the different models, the higher education models that are out there. So you can do what works best for you, your learners, your institution. And one thing that we thought we would bring up, gosh, in 2020, with everything going on in the world, thinking about assessments and your courses, it also may be a good time to review and audit, our courses, including assessments with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Optimally, you may be able to collaborate with your institution's diversity, equity, inclusion team, and just kind of maybe begin that comprehensive review process, of assessments of learning, so that they're beneficial for all of your learners. Next slide. Yeah, so SciStarter education. I know we've Britt brought this page up in previous webinars, but the SciStarter education page has a curated list of projects that are great for the learning, citizen science for the learning environment. And so this is kind of an overview. And each of these pages has links to resources and things that you can use as well. But then I'll go next slide. The next slide is also on that page where the SciStarter education team worked with some other folks to come up with just some prompts. So these may be valuable for you as you're thinking, maybe you've got the right project in mind and you're thinking, okay, I want to maybe have students reflect on that learning experience. So the SciStarter education page has a brainstorm bullet list of possible prompts that you could use. And again, this could be, in a student reflection piece, you could use these, or you may find one or two of these that inspire you to create a separate discussion board topic where students are not only addressing the question, but they're responding to peers and things like that. And in terms of discussion boards, in our citizen science class, we didn't have the requirement to have students respond to their peers. Some of our other classes, they have to respond to at least 2 peers. We didn't. For our citizen science course, luckily the students have gotten so excited that they really do get engaged and respond. But I've often wondered, some will respond to 1. So just as if you go the route of discussion boards, you may want to require respond to 2 of your peers. I always get really proactive to remind them, and they're like, gosh, Jill really wants us responding to our peers. But if they didn't, it's not part of the rubric, so I couldn't deduct from that. But just something to think about as you're, writing assessments and deliverables for your students. Next slide. And I'll pass it to Caroline.
All right. And the page that Jill discussed with those awesome reflection questions and those projects broken out by grade level and things that we think are good fits, you can find that at scistarter.org/education. And you can also use the SciStarter Project Finder to find projects that already have assessment materials with them. So scistarter.org/finder. Both of those links I'll add to the Google Doc as well. But I found that I've seen people use those and find them useful because for the classroom material projects, often they've already thought about assessment and developing those materials, and those might be useful for you. Also on that scistarter.org/education page at the bottom, there's a module that was developed in partnership with SciStarter, instructional designers at Arizona State University, and the National Library of Medicine to basically step people into citizen science for the first time. And you all are welcome to use that module in your courses or with any groups that you educate, or even if you just want to send it to someone to introduce them to citizen science for the first time. We found it useful, and we hope you do too. So I mentioned the Project Finder, and Jill gave that great introduction to the SciStarter education page. We also have these SciStarter dashboards, and this is the biggest thing, right? When you're trying to, track things, which is a key part of assessment, you can really leverage free tools to your advantage. So every user who comes to SciStarter and has a SciStarter account has a dashboard, and then they can track the number and frequency of their contributions to affiliate projects in their dashboard. And hundreds of projects are SciStarter affiliates. These include projects that are listed on Zooniverse, projects like Stall Catchers, Stream Selfie, Globe at Night. Those are the 3 I have up there in my example. But if you use the same email on these accounts, so if you're signed up for a Stall Catchers account and a SciStarter account with the same emails, it will track in the dashboard. So you could have your students theoretically do a bunch of different projects, or do a few curated projects that are relevant to what you're assigning them, and then have them turn in screenshots of their dashboard. And anyone over the age of 13 can have a SciStarter account. So that definitely covers the higher ed space. And a lot of citizen science projects I saw in the example Jill gave earlier, like where they had the iNaturalist journal, a lot of citizen science projects are very great about helping people track their contributions. And with iNaturalist, there's the added benefit of being able to see like species IDs and things like that. So you can also, on the project side, dig a little bit deeper into assessment and for students to look back and see what they've accomplished. So that's the biggest thing I'll say is, you know, make the use of free tools. Don't be afraid to leverage what these different projects and what SciStarter, we're here to help you as well. So you can search projects, discover projects, but also track participation in those projects. And I think the theme of the hour is establish your goal and the best way to assess. And we hope that the building blocks we provided at SciStarter help you in the pursuit of that. So I'll hand it over to Heather for a case study.
Great, thanks. So citizen science can be used in all sorts of courses. It can be used in face-to-face classes. It can be used in an online setting. It can be used with big classes, small classes, and it can be used you know, with any kind of grade level. So we really like the flexibility that is inherent in using citizen science in classes. So there's endless ways that citizen science can be used in classes. This is one tiny example out of the endless possibilities. Also keep in mind that you can go full board, do a deep dive with your students into one project and do the project from beginning to end, all the stages of it. You can use part of a project. So maybe you really care about how well your students can graph and you just want to use the data visualization tools that are part of a project. Maybe you want to let the different pairs of students ask their own independent question from a bigger data set. And so they're not actually collecting data themselves, but they're using pre-existing data. There's just endless ways that you can do this using either part or all of a citizen science project. Or you can also do more than one citizen science project in a given semester. So there's lots of different iterations. So this case study is meant to show an example, certainly not constrain your thinking about what you should do. So for here, we were interested in trying to incorporate citizen science into very large intro bio lecture courses. So these have hundreds of students in them, 500 students sometimes in a single section. And we were trying to figure out how could we incorporate citizen science. The main goal of the course is not citizen science, it's about learning intro biology content. So what we looked at was, could we incorporate part of a citizen science project in one module of the course? So this is a pretty minimal usage of citizen science, but was that minimal usage of citizen science enough to actually increase student understanding of science and science literacy? So the project that we chose to do this with was Caterpillar's Count. It is a project started by Alan Hurlburt at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And this is a project where students sample the same tree branches consistently through time. And it could be, however many times you have, how much time you have available for it, and sample arthropods that are on this branch. And so you're essentially tracking the seasonality of arthropod abundance. One of the broader goals of the citizen science project is to determine how well the migration and reproduction of birds matches up with their arthropod, with peak arthropod abundance, and how that is shifting with climate change. But the project itself that we focused on didn't deal with the birds at all. It just dealt with the arthropod part. And this project website, the Caterpillar's Count website, has a lot of data visualization tools, and it has a large data set where students can use to ask independent questions if they want. Next slide, please. So we were interested in whether the use of this citizen science project in the undergraduate classroom would actually increase the science literacy and biology content knowledge of the enrolled students. And so what we did, we were interested in the idea of citizen science in general, not so much its exact implementation. And so we wanted to look at this in a variety of different settings. And so we actually incorporated this same project into intro bio classes at 3 different institutions. And each institution incorporated the project in different ways, all fairly minimally, all in large enrollment biology classes. And what we did is we gave a pre-test before the citizen science module began and a post-test after the citizen science module ended, looking at biology content knowledge and science literacy using part of the test of science literacy skills that has been published. All right, so what did we find? Well, even with this very minimal use of the citizen science in the class, we saw at the various institutions between an 11 and a 13% increase in their content knowledge and science literacy skills, which, you know, is not huge, but for a essentially 2-week module in many of these cases, that's worthwhile. We also, the students were able to document over 6,500 arthropods in a single season. So from a scientific standpoint, from the project standpoint, this added a wealth of data to the project. And then finally, it also, by working across institutions, it really increased the collaboration and dialogue about best practices among faculty at different institutions. And so that was actually a really fun outcome. That's not something we really went into it thinking as was one of our goals, but it was really fun to see what other people were doing and how they were doing it, and just kind of talk about best ways to implement some of these factors across institutions. So that's one tiny example of what we did that was fairly low effort. We talked to all the faculty involved about their experiences, and they all found it very easy to implement, and they thought it was very beneficial. And so, you know, if you are just now starting to think about whether or not you want to include citizen science, you don't have to, you know, full bore, throw out your entire syllabus and create a whole new class all about citizen science. I mean, you can if you want, and I'm sure it would be fabulous, but you could start by thinking of one small part of your class. Okay, what is one skill I want my students to gain that they sometimes have problems gaining? Or maybe they hate doing this because they think it's so abstract and has nothing to do with the real world. Well, can you pick that skill, and can you find a project that would allow them to learn that skill, gain that competency through the citizen science project? And you might see that it's a very engaging, fun way for your students to do that. Thanks. So off to Caroline, I think, next.
Yeah, so in closing, thank you so much to Jill and to Heather and to Rihanna as well for making all this possible. We're going to open it up to questions in a second, and we'll go through that Google Doc. But first, we just wanted to thank you all for being here. We know that there are really turbulent times in this world, and we've seen a lot of great work from our citizen science community in the past week. You know, I personally have been really heartened by seeing the Black Birders on Twitter and Black in Nature. And I know that, you know, there's probably a lot of things on all of your minds. So we just want to thank you for your time, and we want you to know that we're here to hear, we want to hear any creative thoughts you have about bringing the whole world into the classroom, or your whole self to assessment and to citizen science and to this work. So that's just kind of it in closing. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so we can open up that Google Doc and start going through your questions. And let me drop it in the chat one more time. So everybody in the meeting, there it is. You know what, I'll just open up the Google Doc and share my screen again, just so we can all look at the same thing together. So someone said, I'm curious about accessibility when using and assessing student work in citizen science. What are barriers to consider / address? Who's been successful overcoming some of these barriers, and how? Heather and Jill, what do you think?
Yeah, this is a huge topic. I know since we're online also, even like in our 1-credit science labs, accessibility for all learners. So we have some students come who are visually impaired. There are certain limitations that students may bring to the learning environment, and we work with our diversity and disability offices to ensure that, you know, anything that we're asking the students to do, they have an equitable experience, and that the assessment is fair. For citizen science, it's been so great because there's so many projects that, you know, having distributed learners, if there is a student who doesn't have access to like a body of water or something, there's usually alternatives that we've been able to find. So I think flexibility and student choice has been huge for us, and the students love that. There also, a lot of the citizen science projects are free. There's no cost, and our students really, really appreciate that. In terms of students who do have sight impairments, we will hire a reader. We have some technology tools that can read text aloud. I'm blanking on the software name, and I think there's a bunch of different ones, but our disability accommodations office helps us with that. And all of our universities have an office for that. And so we've been able to reach all students just by checking their needs, meeting them, and ensuring that there's an equitable learning experience for all. We want all students to be able to do science. So kind of meeting them, meeting their needs. Free is good, no cost, low cost is the best, and flexibility and choice. And actually, I've seen some really powerful stuff when distributed learners are working on different projects and then they're sharing out their findings. It enriches the learning experience for everyone. So you don't have to be stressed if, all 24 students can't do the same project. Some may have to, do something different, but it enriches and adds to the learning experience for everyone when they share out. So that's been really neat to see.
I see a question here about barriers people might not think about. Jill, the vision one that you mentioned is a really important one, especially in terms of citizen science, which can be so digital. And really quickly, I just wanted to mention, this isn't related to assessment as much, but it's related to issues of equity. I know I was going to give a talk to a group of students at a homeless shelter in Panama City, Florida after the hurricane. I wanted to do citizen science with them, but I learned beforehand from the organizers that the majority of these students didn't have access to smartphones or computers. And because of the hurricane, even if they did have access to those things, no one really had internet and the grid was just kind of down. So there was no way to kind of transfer data out. So projects like the Great Sunflower Project, which is on the SciStarter education page, they provide things like data sheets. So that's one way I found to be an equitable way to bring people in who may not have as many resources or access to different tools. Because the premise is, you could do the Great Sunflower Project anytime you want, to study pollinators, bring this data sheet, and then perhaps the next time you're at the public library, you can enter your data. So that's one thing to think about when you're trying to expand access and equity.
Yeah, and some libraries have checkout systems for laptops and this and that. Some things we provide laptop carts in classes. So if we do this in a class, we might do certain, if it's more data intensive, computer intensive, we do it in a classroom where we know that we have a cart of laptops available and things like that, and wireless available. So there's, there are different ways to do it. Accessibility is an issue in inclusion. You want to make sure that you're asking students to do something that they're comfortable doing, that they are able to do. But I think, with a little foreplanning, you can generally find solutions.
Looks like someone said in the chat, we did projects to generate data sets, and then we use the data sets and analyses. I assessed the final project, but not necessarily their participation in the citizen science project. It's very interesting. Thank you, Amanda. And for everybody, feel free to put any comments in the chat. We love hearing all this stuff. I think we addressed accessibility already. And Jill also answered the question in the doc, which is awesome. Dan wanted to know any publication on the case study, and Heather said it's being written up now for publication. Ooh, Heather, I can't wait to read it. Oh, another question. Amanda asked, what were some of the content goals you had from the Caterpillar course? Knowledge of arthropods, ecological relations such as predator-prey?
Yeah, and so I answered it below there. So I said that some of the content goals that we had, and I can't remember the full list off the top of my head at the moment, but were things like understanding of phenology. Some had to do with arthropod identification and misconceptions about arthropods, climate change, pollination. There are things like that. And yeah, food webs was some of it, but we didn't get a whole lot into the bird angle. But different campuses focused on slightly different aspects of the project. So that was interesting too, because all of the campuses saw fairly similar increases in knowledge, but the topics in which different universities showed higher gains on some topics than others. And I think it had to do with the exact implementation of the project. So that was interesting to see.
Oh, let's see. I see some good conversation going on up there. That's great. Any other questions from folks? Like Jill or Heather, have you seen anything in the chat?
Oh yeah, great stuff. Keep it coming. I love the ideas. Is anybody planning a citizen science experience for the fall? kind of share that out, maybe some ideas you have.
Yeah, and I've seen some comments about people, thinking they're going to add some more structure to the assessment. And, we're not trying to guilt anybody into doing assessment, but I think it could be really beneficial to both your students and you just to spend some time reflecting on the experience, or you can certainly take it to different levels as well.
Yeah, great points. And actually, I see someone mentioning ServiceLearning, and so some of that connects to co-curricular connections outside of the classroom. And I focus, on the curricular environment, but that's a great point as well, because if you have the AA, SHE sustainability work on your campus, which a lot of colleges and universities have, they've got some really neat materials as well to kind of assess and evaluate student engagement related to sustainability themes. And I know a lot of campuses, citizen science is part of like campus engagement outside of the classroom on sustainability themes. And so that may be an area as well, because I saw someone mention ServiceLearning. Yeah, there's so much outside of the classroom as well as part of that, college awesome learning experience outside of the classroom. Oh, awesome, Sammy. iNaturalist Learn, fantastic. We've heard from so many groups, like environmental consulting groups, that they're usually called in by, Department of Transportation needs to have a survey, what critters live here. And we've heard from environmental consulting groups that one thing they get frustrated about is that undergraduates, they graduate with their awesome bachelors, they are not prepared to identify species in the field. They know so much science, but the identification skills are there. And so we've really seen students who really get involved in projects, including iNaturalist, and they're really practicing and refining their skills. They get great high-paying jobs right after undergraduate with environmental consulting groups that get contracts with state and federal government to do surveys, of biodiversity. Of course, it's kind of sad because sometimes it's before they put a highway in, but the work has to be done. And so those field identification skills are still needed. I know, because some colleges and universities, some of the ology courses are going away. Field ornithology is disappearing at some schools, but hey, we've got these citizen science projects that can keep those skills going in your students and help them get high-paying jobs.
Now, another thing that we've seen is that, and many of you on the call are life science oriented, a lot of your majors may be coming in saying they're pre-med. 95% of them think they're going to medical school, and that's great. But some of them, if you say that you're doing something ecological, they don't have an interest in that. And at our campus anyway, trying to figure out how to teach biodiversity without making it a bunch of memorizing all the phylum or the march through the phyla, which the students used to hate. You can incorporate some really creative citizen science activities to get those same principles across in a much more engaging way. So I think that is a really, really fun thing. And a lot of the people, even if they are med school bound, I mean, if you can get them engaged through a fun activity, they can continue to do this even once they're in their professions, just on the side as a hobby. And the other thing that we've seen is, everybody or many people want to get the students outside more, because students spend so little time outside. And for some reason, some of the students find it much more palatable to go outside if they have a smartphone in their hand and are taking pictures of something, as opposed to just going outside without that. So all of this could be a really good way to kind of introduce some more natural history and some more outdoor time with your students.
That's such a great point. And Heather, you made me think about that too think about all of your diverse audiences, right? You're right, like the pre-med students, we've got the non-major, most of them are gonna be, in business, the non-science major courses, the pre-service educator courses, where we want them to not be scared of science because we want them to teach it in K-5 to their young learners. That is such a great way to think about your audience and what you want. I know exactly, like I want my pre-service teachers and non-science majors to be science literate citizens. And yeah, that citizen science engagement can hook them and cultivate that interest and self-efficacy for learning and doing science. So great point. All the diverse audiences citizen science can play a great role.
You know, this particular webinar, I was thinking, because we had the other happy hour next week, we were talking all about, you know, assessment and all the different roles people can play. Next week, they're specifically talking about citizen science and non-STEM courses. So I bet you they're going to have some interesting things to say about assessing learning there.
Yeah, and there was a question in the chat just a minute ago about you know, opportunities that don't require students to go outside, and there certainly are. And even, you know, so there, as Jill said, there are some 100% online projects. There's also, though, you know, if you find a project interesting that has an outdoor component, your students don't necessarily have to do that component. So the Caterpillars Count, for example, some of the students were not going outside sampling at all. Instead, they were just working off of the pre-existing data set that was available online, and asking questions related to that. You know, it could be things like, did native or non-native trees have more arthropods on them? And, you know, they could go back and they could look at data from, you know, the whole project nationwide if they wanted to, or they could do it on their campus, or you could parse the data and filter the data. And that's not specific just to Caterpillars Count. Many projects, you can do things like that. You can, you know, have the students do just a component if there's something that you're interested in.
Awesome stuff. So we're pretty close to the end. So if anyone has any last minute pressing questions, now is the time.
And
Looking at
you can populate the Google Doc as well for the next couple minutes if there's something you really want to get out there, and we'll respond through it.
Yeah, I'll drop the Google Doc in the chat one more time.
Yeah, and I know the folks that were curious about some more resources for online classes. I know we talked about that a lot in the first virtual happy hour. And so if you didn't catch that one, we do have a recording on our YouTube channel, so you can find that. And there, I know Becky and Colleen gave some examples of stuff that's all online, or ways to encourage students to go outside, but on their own. So we do have some more resources on that.
I see a question from Amanda. She wants to know, some projects make the existing data easy to access. If the data doesn't seem readily available, what are the protocols for reaching out to ask for the data? Do we do that, or is that a big no-no?
Yeah, I usually, so that's a great question, because yeah, with the large data sets, there's so much your students can do, like ask a question, data mine, discover something. I had a student do that with barn swallow migration data on Journey North, and it was awesome. For the most part, it's a great question to think about. For the most part, I've just had experience with the public data sets, like Journey North, you know, theirs are all online and public as an example. And luckily a lot of them are. So the historical data is available online. So that's where I've, you know, seen students dive in. But, you know, that's a great question, because what I've seen, the project owners are so collegial, collaborative. I could see them sharing data sets. So it couldn't hurt to reach out to a project owner, and it actually may prompt them to, you know, put it online. I don't know if anyone has reached out to ask about that. In my experience, there's been so much great stuff online already. That's where we've kind of jumped into.
Yeah, Jill, I'd agree. I definitely gravitate toward projects that are open to sharing their data. But if they don't, like I say, yeah, definitely reach out. You never know what an email will do, you know? Any final thoughts from Jill or Heather?
Yeah, just thank you guys. I know in the higher ed ecosystem and landscape, 2020 has been a year. So thank you guys for coming on this journey with us and doing the good work. And I am so grateful to the Citizen Science Association for, gosh, these times when we can connect and share ideas and learn from each other. So keep the ideas coming, and we'll keep the conversation going, because it's such an exciting area and everybody needs to be a part of it. Thank you all.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you as well. Thank you all for taking the time for being here. Thanks to the CSA for hosting this. And something else just went out the window, but also I was thinking of something else, now forgotten, but don't forget there is one more happy hour next week about non-STEM at the same time, and you can find that information in the same place you found this, but we really appreciate it.
See you all next week.
Oh, and our emails, that's what I was saying. Our emails are on the Google Doc. If you need anything at all, if you're interested in any further conversation, feel free to reach out.
Great, thanks everyone.